back to Proclus on the Timaeus, and we were just looking at the nature of the demiurge. Again, we'll be moving on to the next lemma, the next quote from the dialogue. So, again, however, this must be considered respecting him, the demiurge, viz., according to which of the paradigms the artificer fabricated the world, whether according to that which subsists with invariable sameness, or that which was generated. Proclus. Timaeus, having shown what the form is of the mundane system, that it is generated, and the manner in which it is generated, viz., as sensible, for he makes no mention whatever of time, because he has not yet constituted time, and having also shown what the demiurgic cause is, viz., that it is effective and at the same time paternal, but this is intellectual, imparticipable, and total, he now passes to the third object of inquiry, what the nature is of the paradigm of the universe, whether generated or eternal. For he perceived that every artificer either assumes the paradigm of the things which he fabricates externally, or himself produces them from the paradigm in himself. So we look to a model outside of ourselves, or there is a paradigm in our own mind that we bring about. So like an artist looking to a model for his sculpture or coming up with it out of his own mind. Just as of human artificers, some are able to imitate other things accurately, but others possess themselves a power capable of fashioning admirable and useful works. Thus, he who first made a ship formed in his imagination the paradigm of it. Farther still, this also must be observed, that everything. So we've seen multiple times, human inventions don't have eternal archetypes. They are suspended from human minds. And so he says, he who first made a ship formed in his imagination the paradigm of it. That's how paradigms for human inventions come about. People always want to say, like, oh, so there's a form of a table or a form of a chair. It's like, well, no. There's a paradigm of a table and a chair, but those are in human minds. Farther still, this also must be observed, that everything which makes in an orderly manner has the scope and measure of that which is made. Has the scope and measure. So, the creator of an orderly creation has the measure and scope of the creation in himself. He contains the measure of the thing made. For if it has not, it will err in making, and will not know whether it has arrived at the end when it has. For whence will it know that this is the end, since something may be deficient or redundant, and it may be necessary to take something away or to add something. Okay, so to make in an orderly way, to know when to stop and how much to make, you have the measure of the thing made in yourself. For on this account, bodies make irrationally and stupidly, because they have no measure, nor cause of the thing that is made. Okay. For it is necessary that the medicine should be heated to a certain degree. But if art and medical intellect are not present, defining the measure of energy to the fire, it will operate too abundantly and destroy the whole, though it was intended to contribute to the production of the remedy. So just an example, when you're trying to make something, you don't have the measure in yourself, you don't know how much to, in this case, heat, and you can destroy the thing. For it has not the form of the thing produced. Everything, therefore, which makes ought to have the reason of the thing that is made. And reason there is probably logos, and logos involves proportion, which is kind of the concept of measure for the most part, drawing a comparison between two things. One thing is measured according to another. Like the number 6 is measured by the numbers 2 and 3 and 1 being a perfect number. But yeah, measure is just a proportion of one unit against the others. So reason is the logos term involves measure here. Everything, therefore, which makes ought to have the reason of the thing that is made, if it intends to make it in an orderly manner. Hence, Plato, perceiving this, at the same time that he admits the effective cause, introduces the paradigm of the universe. Just as Aristotle, okay, we're talking about the maker, so we have to talk about the paradigm because that's how the maker makes in an orderly way. He has the measure of the thing made in himself. But is it a thing that he brought into his mind by perception of an external thing, or is it something that he brought about on the spot, on the fly, in order to make the universe? Just as Aristotle also, by subverting the paradigm, co-subverts likewise the maker. So this is an attack on Aristotle, saying there isn't a paradigm for the world. He subverts the idea of a maker of the world. Of course, Simplicius would probably respond that he does talk about the paradigms as thoughts in the mind of the unmoved mover, thought thinking itself. That's where the paradigms exist. Proclus doesn't read Aristotle so closely to look for these, compatibilities. Plato, therefore, taking it for granted that there is a paradigm, investigates through these things what the nature of it is, and employing the before-mentioned definitions, discovers the object of his inquiry through the three former hypotheses. But in what manner he makes the discovery, and through what kind of demonstration, we shall shortly survey. Employing the before-mentioned definitions of the demiurge and eternal and so forth, discovers the object of his inquiry through the three former hypotheses. So he's probably going to, I guess these are hypotheses regarding the nature of the world, whether it is eternal or not, and so forth. So these are things we've already looked at, and from those facts about the world, we'll know facts about the paradigm of the world, presumably. Okay. An hypothesis, I guess, has less the sense of a conjecture that is to be tested than it has the sense of a beginning of a chain of reasoning. So a hypothesis could be just the first step in any logical chain of reasoning. It doesn't have to be like the English sense of hypothesis. In the first place, so it doesn't involve the connotation of being speculative necessarily. You can have a hypothesis that is the beginning of a chain of reasoning that is actually axiomatic. So, in the first place, however, this very thing must be shown by us, that the world was generated according to a certain paradigm. So Plato assumes it, but Proclus says it's on us to prove it. And in the next place, we must investigate what this paradigm is, and in what order of beings it subsists. If indeed the fabrication of wholes is indefinite and without design, there is not a paradigmatic cause of the universe. But if it is not lawful to conceive this to be the case, and the demiurge knows what he produces, and knowing thus produces the fabrication of the world, the causes of the things generated are contained in him, and it is necessary either that he should primarily possess these causes, or that they should be imparted to him by more ancient principles. But whichever of these we admit, there is a paradigmatic cause prior to the world. Farther still, since the demiurge is intellect, if he produces by his very being, he produces that which is most similar to himself. But this is to produce an image of himself. If, however, he produces from deliberation, this is entirely and in every respect unworthy of the demiurgic cause. And if someone should admit this to be the case, yet it will follow that the form of the demiurgic work pre-exists in him. So we're previewing arguments that Proclus is going to look into at greater length. So the idea that the demiurge at one moment decides, I'm going to go ahead and create the universe now, that's unworthy of the nature of demiurgic cause, which should probably abide in the same and be eternally acting never deficient of its perfect energy, etc. And then, if we do accept that, though, it would still follow that there must be a paradigm in him. So, for everyone who deliberates and consults, rather, antecedently assumes in himself the paradigm of that about which he deliberates. Okay? So it's necessary, even if he does deliberate, that he has the paradigm in his mind that he's deliberating about. Otherwise, you can't really think about a thing unless it's there in your mind. This, therefore, may be demonstrated through many other arguments that it is necessary the paradigm of the world should have an existence prior to the world, and especially when the demiurgic cause is presupposed. For it is necessary that the demiurge, being intellectual, should either be ignorant of the order of what is fabricated, or that he should know it. But if he is ignorant of this, how can he providentially attend to it? And how can he give arrangement to the universe? If, therefore, he knows it, how is it possible he should not comprehend that which is generated by the intellection of it according to one cause? Okay, so if he knows that paradigm, then he should comprehend, according to one principle and cause, its nature, because it flows from that nature. I guess something like that. Okay. In the next place, it must be considered what this paradigm is and in what order of beings it ranks. For there is a difference of opinion respecting this among the more ancient interpreters. Thus, according to the divine Iamblichus, that which is being itself, and which is comprehended by intelligence in conjunction with reason, is the paradigm of the universe. So, being itself, the form of being, comprehended by intelligence in conjunction with reason. So we know the form of the universe being itself through intellect and dianoia, but that form is being itself. Okay? For he admits that the one is beyond the paradigm, but shows that what is being itself concurs with it, and denominates each that which is comprehended by intelligence. Okay, so that which is, so being itself is like the chief member of the second hypostasis. So the paradigm is simply that which intelligence and reason reflects upon. That contains, so it contains all of the rational intellectual principles in the universe. It's there in being itself, which I'm sure Proclus will agree with to some extent. That paradigm is there for the first time at the level of being, but somehow or other I imagine he's going to go beyond Iamblichus and say that this Phanes entity, Phanes divinity, will be the proper form for the cosmos, whereas being is sort of a form beyond that level. Okay, so how will he qualify that? And I believe Phanes is going to be like in the second, or no, it's going to be the third phase of the first phase of the second hypostasis, or some in that region approximately, but we'll just follow Proclus here and see. Okay. But the philosopher Porphyry supposes, as we have before observed, that imparticipable soul is the demiurge, but that intellect is the paradigm, thus beholding in subordinate natures which exist in more ancient and venerable orders. Of course, we reject Porphyry's idea of the demiurge, so his account of the paradigm is going to be misplaced too. For Plato, having said that the demiurge is intellect, denominates the paradigm intelligible, but this interpreter, assuming soul from the demiurge, calls the paradigm intellect. So just kind of mocking Porphyry's opinion, like Plato's text itself contradicts Porphyry's opinion. In the third place, the admirable Theodorus, dividing the demiurgic triad and perceiving that in each monad of it there is a first, middle, and last, calls the last in each animal itself, and thus says that intellect looks to animal itself, for according to him, intellect is proximately suspended from essential animal. And Theodorus, who was Theodorus? There are several. There's a more ancient Theodorus. I wish we knew. Neoplatonist. Theodorus of Essene was a Neoplatonist philosopher who lived in the 3rd and 4th century. Okay. Let me see what school or what teacher he had. He was a Neoplatonist philosopher, native of one of the towns which bore the name of Essene, so we don't know which Essene, probably the one in Laconia. He was a disciple of Iamblichus. Okay. Let's just read the Wikipedia description of his views. It might clarify as we're reading this. So Theodorus believed there was a first cause from which emanated a triad that was the One. So the One is that triad, probably the abiding, proceeding, reverting of the ineffable, exempt One. This One, therefore, acted as a trinity, or three in one, similar to that of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and of the Christian Trinity. Each member of the triad was equivalent to one of the three sounds in hen, the Greek word for one. N, the three letters, I guess. An aspiration, long vowel, and a terminal nasal emanation, n, into the cosmos. So similar to the om idea, hen, om, interesting, which is startlingly similar to om and its symbolism. Okay, I didn't read that in the... All right. And like the sound of om and Brahma as breath, it represented life creation, the universe in its entirety, and thus the transcendent One, the All. Furthermore, as Gersh points out in reference to Proclus, but in a way that is also relevant to Theodorus' use of hen, the three syllables are surrounded by, enclosed within, the eternal silence of the One, since he is ultimate silence. This too is part of Om. And as Gersh also points out, this divine silence became a significant part of later Neoplatonism and Christian mysticism, through the works of Pseudo-Dionysius. Theodorus was also, according to both Iamblichus and Proclus, concerned with numerology, relating the numbers of letters in words to their hidden meanings. He apparently believed these hidden clues offered insights into the theology of the cosmos, something that both Iamblichus and Proclus criticized, in part because it suggested a causal relationship that sprung from numbers upwards towards the divine. Okay. So not a totally praising view that Proclus had of him, but in general an admirable character, according to Proclus. First, middle, and last calls the last. So we're looking at the demiurgic triad. So presumably that triad that immediately follows the demiurge of wholes, the one symbolized by the three characters. Yeah, Brian in the Jitsi says one has a similar set of phonemes, the three letters. W, n. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Alright, so we're looking at the demiurgic triad, that in each monad of the triad, so each member of the triad, there is a first, middle, and last. So in the Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades aspects, there is first, middle, and last. And the last of each of these is animal itself. And thus says that intellect looks to animal itself. For according to him, intellect is proximately suspended from essential animal. This seems like a contradiction to me, because if animal itself is in the last phase of each of these members of the demiurgic triad, then it's not suspended from, they are not suspended from animal itself, and yet intellect is proximately suspended from essential animal. So I'm a little bit confused by that. We'll read on and see if anything's clarified. Hence, either the essential demiurge does not fabricate looking to animal itself, or the paradigmatic causes are not many, or not every demiurge affects his proper production according to a certain paradigm, lest the maker should make looking to things posterior to himself, and thus should ignorantly sustain the passion of a partial soul. So now, Syrianus, our preceptor, however, according to his divine intellectual conceptions, has thought fit to give this subject an appropriate examination. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this seeming contradiction here, because we're not sticking with Theodorus's interpretation anyway. Syrianus has the answer, according to Proclus here. For of the ancients, some have made the demiurge himself to possess the paradigm of wholes, as Plotinus. Others, not the demiurge, but have asserted that the paradigm is prior to him, as Porphyry, and others, as Longinus, that it is posterior to him, whom our preceptor asks whether the demiurge is immediately posterior to the one, or there are also other intelligible orders between the demiurge and the one. Okay, so our preceptor asks Longinus, so challenging Longinus's view, evidently. For if the demiurge subsists immediately after the one, it is absurd that all the multitude of intelligibles should be immediately posterior to that which is without multitude. Alright, so we have to have intermediate levels between the one and the demiurge. Longinus probably thought it was immediate, but the demiurge contains all the principles of the world, so it contains a multitude, which is not adapted to be immediately proximate to the one, of course. You have to go through the few before you get to the many from the one. For through numbers proximate to the one, the progression is to the whole of number and the whole of multitude. Okay, so you don't go to a multitude, you go to the whole of number and the whole of multitude first. But if there are other orders between the one and the demiurge, it must be investigated whether the paradigm of the universe is in the demiurge primarily, or posterior to, or prior to him. For if it is primarily in him, we must admit that he contains every intelligible multitude. For the paradigm is the most beautiful of intelligibles, so that again he will be intelligible, and not what we a little before demonstrated him to be, intellectual. Though the paradigm has 4 ideas alone, but the demiurge has those which are more partial than these. Oh yeah, the paradigm only has, what are the 4 ideas in the paradigm? So being, the same, the other, and I'm assuming the principle of mixture. Alright, so the paradigm has 4 ideas alone, but the demiurge has those which are more partial than these, viz. The ideas of the sun and moon, and each of the natures that have a perpetual subsistence. But if the paradigm is posterior to him, he will be converted to that which is less excellent and less honorable, which it is not lawful to admit of any divine nature. So he wouldn't condescend to look to a paradigm subordinate to himself. He'd be making himself worse in doing that. So that the paradigm is prior to the demiurge. Right. If, however, it is prior to the demiurge, whether is it seen by him or not seen by him? So the paradigm is prior. Does he look to it or not, I guess? To say, therefore, that it is not seen by him does not accord with Plato and the nature of things. For it is absurd that our soul should see it and speak about it, but that it should not be seen by intellect, and by a total intellect. But if the demiurge sees the intelligible, whether being converted to himself does he see it, or does he alone perceive it external to himself? Okay, so if it's prior to him, does he see it by reflecting on himself and the image in himself, or does he revert back externally to himself to the paradigm? If, however, he alone sees it external to himself, he sees the image of being and possesses sense instead of intelligence. But if converted to himself, the object of his intellectual perception will be in himself, so that the paradigm is prior to and in the demiurge, intelligibly indeed prior to him, but intellectually in him. So, the paradigm itself is prior to the demiurge. We can still go with the Iamblichus for the most part and say it's being itself, but I imagine we're going to get to this more precise location in the intelligibles still, presumably from Syrianus. Okay, so the paradigm itself is prior to the demiurge, but it's reflected in him intellectually, and he, through intellectual reversion, then sees the image of the paradigm in himself. The words of Plato also appear at one time to make the paradigm different from, and at another the same with the demiurge. For when he says, quote, "Such and so many ideas, therefore, as intellect saw in that which is animal itself, so many he conceived, by a dianoetic energy, this universe also should possess." Not that the demiurge has himself a dianoetic energy, but that he saw fit that soul, which he's creating, should dianoetically encompass all of the particular ideas that he surveyed in himself in the reflection of the paradigm. Okay, so he asserts that the demiurge, as being different from the paradigm, is extended to animal itself. And again, when he says, quote, "Let us consider after the similitude of what animal the composing artificer constituted the world. Indeed, we must by no means think that he fashioned it similar to such animals as subsist in the form of a part, but we must admit that it is the most similar of all things to that animal, of which other animals, both considered individually and according to their genre, are nothing more than parts." In these words also he separates him who constituted the universe from the paradigm. But when again he clearly says, quote, "He was good, but in that which is good, envy can never be inherent about anything whatever. Being therefore void of this, he was willing that all things should be as much as possible similar to himself." Which is not a contradiction. So to make things similar to yourself is to be a paradigm to other things. Well, the demiurge can have a paradigm that he looks to and reverts upon, and at the same time act as a paradigm for the world. But I guess Proclus's solution will probably be that part of his nature is the reflection of the paradigm. The paradigm itself is intelligible and prior to him, but he contains it intellectually, and so that is his nature that is then reflected in the beings dianoetically and physically. So here the sameness of the demiurge with the paradigm appears to be manifest, so that in some places Plato says that the demiurge is the same, and in others that he is different from the paradigm, and very properly makes each of these assertions. For the ideas, or four monads of ideas, prior to the fabrication of things, subsist intelligibly. But the order of forms proceeds into the demiurge, and the whole number of ideas is one of the monads which he contains. So when just looking at the quotes again, so he says such and so, it sort of does not comport super well with what Proclus is saying. Such and so many ideas, therefore, as intellect saw in that which is animal itself, so many he conceived of dynoetic energy. But then that would mean that animal itself wouldn't just have four monads of ideas, it would have the whole multitude. He should find the whole multitude of ideas that manifest in the cosmos in himself as an image of the paradigm, which should only have four. But, all right. For the ideas, or four monads of ideas, prior to the fabrication of things, subsist intelligibly, but the order of forms proceeds into the demiurge. The whole number of ideas is one of the monads which he contains. Orpheus, so now we're going to cross-reference the other system, or one of the other systems of theology that Proclus uses. Orpheus, also indicating these things, says that the intelligible god, Phanes, was absorbed by the demiurge of wholes. So that's the sense in which the paradigm is brought into the demiurge. And Plato asserts that the demiurge looks to the paradigm, indicating through sight intellectual perception. According to the theologist, however, so now we're talking about the Chaldeans, I guess. According to the theologist, however, the demiurge leaps, as it were, to the intelligible God, and as the fable says, absorbs him, similar to the Orphic myth. For if it be requisite clearly to unfold the doctrine of our preceptor, the God who is called Protagonus by Orpheus, and who is established at the end of the intelligibles, is animal itself with Plato. Okay, so does Orpheus call him Protagonus or Phanes? Let's look up Protagonus. Oh, okay, it is the same god. Yeah, so in Orphic cosmogony, Phanes, or Protagonus, is a primeval deity who is born from the cosmic egg at the beginning of creation. Okay. Who is called Protagonus by Orpheus, and who is established at the end of the intelligibles, is animal itself with Plato. How we get to the end of intelligibles rather than being itself will be interesting, because being itself is the beginning of the intelligibles. Phanes is at the end of the intelligibles. Which kind of makes sense, as if you're looking for the paradigm for the world, you want the corresponding member to the demiurge. The demiurge is the third member of the reverting phase of the second hypostasis. So the paradigm that he looks to should kind of correlate with the higher phases. Elsewhere, Proclus says that your connection to higher orders can happen in one of two ways. Either through your leader of your series, you can look to your monad, you're always connected to your monad of your series, and it is connected to the genus, basically, that it's suspended from. So you can go to the monad and then above, or you can have a direct sympathetic connection to your corresponding member in a next higher level. So like the daimon is a rank of soul above mortal soul, so you have a daimon that you have a special connection to because you are like the correlative member. So the demiurge is the correlative member to Phanes, who is the last of the intelligibles. The demiurge is the last of the intellects, whole intellects, and so the last of the whole intelligibles will be Phanes. It also makes sense for another reason, in that to act as a paradigm, you don't just want this seminal intelligible, you want that proliferated and then condensed, so that all of the multitude of intelligible nature is there in one. Being itself contains that multitude, but causally, it contains it seminally, and so it wouldn't be as fit to act as a paradigm. It'd be like, in some sense, if you could like condense the blueprint of a house into a file, the file containing all of the explicit architectural details that contains the but you wouldn't use that as a paradigm. The file, you would use the image of the file rendered in an operating system and a program through a user interface, proliferated, multiplied, looking back to the its seed. Then that can act. You can take that as your paradigm and act on it and actually build something with it, if that's a clear thought. So for those two reasons, it's the correlative member of the demiurge himself in the intelligibles, and also you would want your paradigm to be not so condensed and unified. You would want it proliferated, but not scattered. So you want it proliferated and reverted back so that you have something that's manageable and also contains the multitude of forms that you're going to actually use. All right. So, animal itself with Plato. Hence, it is eternal and the most beautiful of intelligibles, and is in intelligibles that which Jupiter is in intellectuals. Right. So, the correlative member. And Fanny's being the most beautiful is interesting. You know, you would think, well, wouldn't the form of beauty be the most beautiful? I don't know if we've read specifically from Proclus on the nature of beauty necessarily. I don't remember doing that. So this raises a question about the nature of beauty. So we're not treating beauty as one of the forms, even though in the Phaedrus we hear of the form of the beautiful. But Fanny's is the most beautiful. So Fanny's could be the form of beauty, potentially as well. All right, that's one solution to this problem that I'm raising here. So it's probably clear, but just to make it clear, if if Fanny's is the most beautiful of intelligibles, then something else would be more beautiful than beauty itself, which doesn't work. So Fanny's must be beautiful, be the beautiful itself. Or beauty is not a form, but is a relation between the one and the forms. So those are two possible solutions. Either beauty is not a form, and Plato is talking in a kind of sensu lato when he talks about the form of beauty in the Phaedrus, or Fanny's is the form of beauty. Those are the only two resolutions I can see to this. Otherwise, you'll have the problem that something else is more beautiful than beauty itself, which we can't have. All right. Each, however, is the boundary of these orders. So they're the limit, they're the last member, boundary of their respective orders. And the former, indeed, is the first of paradigmatic causes, but the latter is the most monadic of demiurgic causes. Right. So the demiurge of wholes is the first of the demiurges, efficient causes, and then Fanny's will be the first paradigmatic cause. So being itself doesn't cause in the manner of a paradigm, interestingly. So the first, not all the intelligibles act as paradigms then. They are mediated through the last of their member, which kind of makes sense in that, as I said before, like a member of one series can interact with the superior series through the first of his series, and then that first of his series is connected to the last of the series above. So the last of the paradigmatic entities, the last of the intelligibles, is always the mediator to lower ranks. But then you'd be left with the question, well, doesn't being itself act as a paradigm of the particular being of all things? And well, yes, but even then, maybe it's still mediated through Fanny's But it's at least we can take it as granted and stated here, asserted that Fanny's the third phase, the reverting phase of the first phase of the second hypostasis, is the first of the paradigmatic causes. So not all the intelligibles act as paradigmatic causes, but the last of the intelligibles acts as the paradigmatic cause, or the first of paradigmatic causes. And that's, again, I don't completely get the reasoning there, why it's the first. Maybe he'll explain it, but we can remember that the last of the intelligibles is the first of the paradigmatic causes. And then the latter, the demiurge, is the most monadic of demiurgic causes. Hence, Jupiter is united to the paradigm through night as the medium, as being filled from thence, becomes an intelligible world, as in intellectuals. Okay, so night, where is the precise place of night in the system? I'm not. It would have to be somewhere in that middle rank, the intelligible and intellectual gods. I guess night, to make this all fit together nicely, night would be the third phase of the second hypostasis. That way, the last of being, the last of life, the last of intellect are all joined. The last of being, mediating through the last of life, night, to the last of intellect, Zeus, perhaps. But then I also like the imagery here, where the Phanes is the lord of light, and Jupiter, that intellect, receives the light from Phanes through night. So it's like you have the darkness, and then the light shines through the darkness, and you have intellect perceive it and organize it into a world. So I like that. Okay, so being filled from thence becomes an intelligible world in himself, but in an intellectual manner. So this is an Orphic poem, or Orphic hymn. Then of Protagoras the mighty strength was seen, for in his belly he contained the whole of things, and mingled, where 'twas fit, the force and powerful vigor of the god. Hence with the universe great Jove contains. Very properly, therefore, does Plato now say that the demiurge looked to the paradigm in order that, becoming all things through the intellectual perception of it, he may give subsistence to the sensible world. For the paradigm was the universe intelligibly, but the demiurge intellectually, and the world sensibly. So the universe intelligibly is Phanes. The universe intellectually is Zeus. And the universe sensibly is the world animal as a sensible being, which is also a god still. Hence also the theologist says, for in his sacred heart he these concealed, and into joyful light again revealed. Okay. That the world, therefore, was generated according to a paradigm, what this paradigm is, after what manner it is above, and how it is in the demiurgic intellect, is manifest through what has been said. Okay, so we've located the paradigm, and how the demiurge looks to it, and how he looks to himself, and how the universe is modeled off of each of those in a different way. Okay. Some, however, doubt why Plato inquires. Seems like this would be a good place to stop, potentially, because it looks as though he's, well, we can just go a little bit longer and get to the next lemma, actually. Some, however, doubt why Plato inquires whether the world was fabricated according to that which is generated. Yet why even ask this question, or according to that which is intelligible? For there is not any other generated nature in order that the universe might be fabricated with relation to it. The world contains generated natures, all generated natures are in the world, so why even ask? Like, if, therefore, the inquiry had been concerning Socrates or any other partial nature, the question, say they, would have been reasonable. But as the inquiry is concerning the universe, is it not impossible it should have been constituted with relation to that which is generated? For what other generated nature is there besides the universe? We may dissolve this doubt, however, by recollecting what has been frequently said, that Plato calls soul generated so far as it participates of time. Okay, well, there you go. Sensu lato, generated things include anything that's made or emanated in any respect, in the widest sense, but even Plato uses it pertaining to soul. But the inquiry here is, what is the paradigm of the universe, whether it is soul or intellect or the intelligible? Yeah, because presumably he is the demiurge is making the world soul. Well, he could look to the paradigmatic soul, which might be prior to the world soul. There'd be like, I mean, I can even see how you could reason this way in Proclean logic, where you could have an exempt, imparticipable soul that acts as an exempt paradigm of soul, and then have the world soul that is fashioned in the image of it, that is then participated of directly by particular souls. But the thing that's wrong with that is really that the demiurge would then be looking beneath himself. Okay. For these are the only things that are eternal: soul, intellect, and intelligibles. And on this account, he asks whether the world was generated with relation to a generated or to an eternal nature. After this manner, as it has appeared to some, the doubt may be solved. May it not, however, be possible to solve it by another more perfect method, through which it will also be evident that the confused and disorderly nature prior to the world must not be said, as Atticus and Plutarch thought it must, to be unbegotten? So the confused and disorderly nature mentioned in the Theaetetus is also mentioned in the Timaeus, sort of like the chaos, but it's like a material substrate. You could equate it to that body, or that matter, let's see, indefinite body, indefinite magnitude, taking up the first really existent bit of matter. It can't exist with respect to time because position and all those other things are more formal, definite qualities. So the very minimal level of form is going to be something that is sort of, would be something unbegotten, but Proclus is here saying he's going to say with this next explanation that that confused and disorderly nature is not unbegotten. So let's hear him out here, through which it will also be evident that the confused and disorderly nature, quantum foam, we'll call it, prior to the world must not be said, as Atticus and Plutarch thought it must, to be unbegotten. For if nothing was generated prior to the universe, it was ridiculous to inquire whether the world was generated with relation to perpetual being or to that which is generated. This, however, is now investigated. Prior to the world, therefore, there was a certain generated nature. And since it was neither perpetual being nor place, for three things, as Plato says, were prior to the generation of the universe, viz., being, place, and generation, it is evident that the so much celebrated confused and disorderly nature was a thing of this kind. That it must be generation, I guess. We're going to reread this because it's kind of important. Hence, not the universe only, but that which was moved in a confused and disorderly manner was generated, as we have said, and had a prior subsistence. So it was generated in a wider sense. So it's not unbegotten. It's a generated being in the same sense that soul is generated, although eternal, or although perpetual and without a beginning. The world, therefore, possessing this confused nature as matter, but the intelligible pre-existing as more excellent, whether was the universe assimilated to the material nature which it contains, or to that which is essentially more divine. Okay, all right, so yeah, so what I'm getting is that the confused, or rather, before the cosmos, there were three things: being, place, and generation. That was there prior to the cosmos, meaning that those things are necessary preconditions of any cosmos, so they're prior logically. So generation is prior logically to the cosmos. And since since that confused and generated nature is not being but becoming, and it's not a place because it doesn't have location, it is generation. So it can be then that generation, that generated paradigm, I guess, to kind of stretch it, that Plato is asking about, or Timaeus is asking about in the dialogue, as in, is the paradigm above or beneath the cosmos? So that paradigm could be the confused and disorderly nature, which is an object of generation, although it doesn't have a beginning in time. Or it can be above it in being, in the intelligibles, I guess. We're going to go back now and just read more carefully. May it not, however, be possible to solve it by another more perfect method through which it will also be evident that the confused and disorderly nature prior to the world must not be said, as Atticus and Plutarch thought it must, to be unbegotten? Okay, so it's perpetual and has no beginning in time, but it is a generated nature according to the wider sense of the term generation that Proclus just discussed. For if nothing was generated prior to the universe, it was ridiculous to inquire whether the world was generated with relation to perpetual being or to that which is generated. So we can't say that nothing was generated prior to the universe. We have to use a sense of generation here that includes things that are perpetual and have no beginning in time. This, however, is now investigated. Prior to the world, therefore, there was a certain generated nature. And since it was neither perpetual being nor place, so perpetual being is not generated, and place is not generated, although we don't have an explanation for that. For three things, as Plato says, were prior to the generation of the universe, viz., being, place, and generation. It is evident that the so much celebrated confused and disorderly nature was a thing of this kind, that it was basically generation. Prior to the cosmos, there was generation in the wider sense, and that was the confused and disorderly nature. Hence, not the universe only, but that which was moved in a confused and disorderly manner was generated, as we have said, and had a prior subsistence. The world, therefore, possessing this confused nature as matter, but the intelligible pre-existing as more excellent, whether was the universe assimilated to the material nature which it contains, or to that which is essentially more divine. For being a medium between the two, it is necessarily assimilated to one of the extremes. Okay, so that's why we asked the question. For it is supposed that the demiurge assumed that disorderly nature and perceives animal itself. So that Plato very properly inquires to which of these the demiurge assimilates the universe, whether to that which he assumes or to that which he sees. To these things, therefore, that which follows is conformable, viz., that the world, being beautiful, it was assimilated to the intelligible, and not to that which was moved in a confused and disorderly manner. For that which is assimilated to this is deformed, as lacking form. It's the minimal amount of form which we've seen elsewhere in Simplicius on Aristotle's physics, is the indefinite quantum. So quantity is the first of the accidental categories. It's the first form that a substance can participate of, therefore, and an indefinite quantum is the very least amount of form that some substance can participate of. Substance in the Aristotelian sense of a substrate. And, okay, we can go on here. Some of the interpreters, however, say that Plato does not inquire concerning the demiurge, according to which of the paradigms he made the world. Even though we don't have that much, I don't want to rush through this, and I do want to review it anyway. So we'll probably go back and just read this. We'll pick up with this because it's sort of one of my favorite topics in a lot of this Platonic and Aristotelian physics, the nature of matter. So let's just come back to this paragraph next time. All right, any thoughts on the reading today? Yeah, Chris in the Jitsi at one point says photons travel through the darkness of space. Right, so it's like the conception of the world in the demiurge is an analogy to the way that the cosmos itself manifests, like light through darkness. And so Fanny's intelligible light comes through night, intellectual darkness, or something. But, okay. Very good. So we'll pick up with this next.